The mysterious girl. It was a chilly evening in the city, and the streets were busy with people hurrying home after work. The bright lights of the shops and street lamps reflected off the wet pavement, making everything look like it was covered in a soft glow. In the middle of this crowd walked a young woman who seemed to have a secret. Her name was Lyra, but no one knew that yet. All they could see was her mask. She wasn't an unusual sight on the streets of the city. Many people wore masks these days, but Lyra's mask was different. It was dark, almost shiny, and covered her face completely. It was perfectly smooth, with no eyes, mouth, or nose visible. Only her eyes, sharp and intense, showed through the small holes in the mask. And they held a strange energy, something powerful that seemed to look right through people, making them uneasy. Ryan had noticed her the moment she walked past. He had been standing near a cafe, sipping his coffee when he first saw her. He had never seen anyone like her. Her presence was magnetic. Everyone else seemed to ignore her, lost in their own world, but Ryan couldn't stop staring. There was something about her that made him want to know more. She moved through the crowd like she didn't belong. Her steps were swift and graceful, but there was a nervous energy about her, as if she was always looking over her shoulder. Ryan felt a strange pull in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he had to follow her. He waited for a few seconds, then began to walk after her, blending in with the crowd. He was careful not to make it obvious. He didn't know why he felt this way. Maybe it was just curiosity, but something inside him told him that if he didn't find out who she was, he might regret it. The young woman turned a corner and disappeared into an alley. Ryan's heart raced. He quickened his pace, hoping to catch a glimpse of her again. He reached the corner and stopped, staring down the alley. It was dark and narrow, with tall buildings on either side. There were no streetlights, and it seemed like a place that people avoided. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then decided to follow. As he walked into the alley, the air felt colder. He could barely see anything in the shadows. But then, in the distance, he saw her. She was standing there, facing the wall, her back to him. Her shoulders were tense, as if she was waiting for something or someone. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way she stood there that felt wrong, as if she wasn't just hiding from people, but from something far worse. He took another step forward, and just as his foot hit the ground, she turned quickly. Her eyes locked with his. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Ryan felt his heart skip a beat. Her eyes were piercing, glowing with an intensity he had never seen before. They were not the eyes of a normal person. There was power in them, something beyond human. But before he could react, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving him standing there, staring at the empty alley. Ryan blinked, his mind racing. What had just happened? Who was she? And why did he feel like he had seen something dangerous in those eyes? He stood still for a moment, trying to calm himself, but something in him refused to let it go. He had to find out who she was. There was no way he could just forget about her after that encounter. As he turned to leave, he noticed something strange on the ground. It was a small piece of paper, barely visible in the dim light. He bent down to pick it up. It was a napkin, folded neatly. He opened it, and inside was a symbol, drawn in black ink. It looked like a mix of strange shapes, something he couldn't quite understand. The symbol seemed important, too important to just ignore. Ryan slipped the napkin into his pocket and looked down the alley one more time. She was gone, leaving behind only the mystery. As he walked back to the street, his thoughts were spinning. Who was this woman? And what was she hiding? The questions piled up, and with every step he took, he felt more drawn to finding out the truth. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random encounter. That night, he had glimpsed something more than a girl with a mask. There was a story here, a story that he wasn't sure he was ready to uncover. Ryan's mind raced as he thought about everything he had just witnessed. That strange symbol, the way she looked at him, and the feeling that she was running from something. The only thing he knew for sure was that this wasn't the last time he would see her. The city felt different as he walked home, the streets colder and quieter than before. Somewhere out there, in the shadows, was a woman with a secret that was about to change everything. Unlikely encounter. The next few days passed in a blur for Ryan. He couldn't stop thinking about Lyra, her mask, her eyes, the symbol she had left behind. It was as if she had invaded his thoughts, refusing to let go. He spent every free moment searching online for any clues about her. But every lead came up empty. No one knew her name. No one recognized the symbol. It was as though she didn't exist, except for that brief moment when their paths had crossed. But even though he couldn't find any answers, Ryan's curiosity only grew stronger. He knew deep down that she was hiding something important. And if he could just figure out what it was, everything would make sense. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Ryan was sitting in his favorite cafe, nursing a cup of coffee while staring blankly at his phone, trying to piece together the mystery. The cafe was quiet, with only a few other customers scattered around. The soft hum of conversation and the clink of mugs filled the air, but Ryan barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere. And then, just as he was about to give up on his search, he saw her again. She walked in, the familiar mask covering her face, her eyes once again glowing through the small holes. She didn't look around or seem to notice the other people in the cafe. She simply walked to the counter and ordered a drink in a soft, almost inaudible voice. There was something about her presence that made the whole cafe seem to quiet down. Ryan's heart skipped a beat as she passed by his table. This time, he couldn't let her slip away. His hand trembled as he stood up and approached her. "Excuse me," Ryan said, trying to sound casual but feeling a knot form in his stomach. I saw you the other day. Outside. You looked like you were in a hurry." Lyra turned slowly, her mask tilted just enough that her eyes met his. For a moment, she said nothing, just studied him, as if deciding whether or not to acknowledge his presence. Her eyes were guarded, but there was something else there, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps even relief. "I don't remember you," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. There was a strange tension in her words, as if she was trying to keep her emotions in check. I don't mean to intrude," Ryan stammered, his heart racing. "But I can't stop thinking about what happened. There's something about you, something I can't explain." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You should forget about it," she said, her tone sharper now. "People like you don't need to get involved in things that don't concern you." Ryan was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, so cold. But her words only made him more determined. Something was wrong. He couldn't walk away now. "I can't," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "There's something about you, something different. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, she seemed to make up her mind. "Fine," she said quietly. "You want to know the truth. I'm not from here. And I'm not like anyone you've ever met. But you're asking the wrong questions, Ryan." Ryan's eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" Lyra's lips curved into a small, cryptic smile. "I know more than you think." Before Ryan could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, confused and overwhelmed. The only thing left in his hands was the sense that something big was unfolding, something that was far beyond his understanding. Ryan tried to follow her, but by the time he reached the door, she had disappeared into the street. He stepped outside, scanning the area, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had melted into the shadows once again. A sense of urgency gripped him. What was going on? Why had she told him so little? And how had she known his name? There was no way she could have. He had never told her. His mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. He had to find her again. The napkin with the strange symbol was still in his pocket, and now it seemed even more important. But what could it mean? Why was she in danger? And why was she so determined to keep him out of it? Ryan felt a strange connection to her, even though they had barely spoken. It was as if the answers to his questions were buried deep inside her, waiting for him to uncover them. But every step forward only seemed to push him further into a web of mystery. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something bigger was happening, and he had just crossed the first line of a story that would change everything. The mask comes off. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It wasn't just the strange, lingering memories of Lyra's eyes, or the mystery of the symbol she had left behind. No, it was deeper than that. Every day, as he walked through the streets, he felt like he was being followed. Every corner he turned, every shadow he passed, there was a sense of being observed. He couldn't explain it, but he was sure of it. Someone, or something, was watching him. And Lyra, she was at the center of it all. After that brief encounter at the cafe, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about her. He'd returned to his apartment that night with more questions than ever. He'd spent hours researching her name, but once again, found nothing. The symbol on the napkin was a dead end. His brain churned with one thought. Why was she hiding? Why did she insist that he forget about it? And why had she shown him just a glimpse of the truth? It wasn't until the following week that he found the answer. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning. Ryan was walking to work, his mind still spinning from the encounter with Lyra. He hadn't seen her again, but he hadn't given up hope either. His eyes scanned the crowd as he walked, expecting to see her at any moment. But there was nothing. The city felt empty, lifeless, as if it were holding its breath. That was when he saw her, standing across the street, looking right at him. Lyra. She was standing perfectly still, as if she were waiting for him. The mask was in place, hiding her features once again, but there was something different about the way she held herself. This wasn't the same guarded woman he had met before. This time, she looked tired, worn. The fear that had been hidden in her eyes was more visible now, a kind of desperation that she couldn't mask, no matter how hard she tried. Ryan's heart raced. He crossed the street without thinking, ignoring the traffic, pushing his way through the crowds until he was standing right in front of her. "You," he started, but his voice caught in his throat. What could he say? Was he ready for what she might reveal? Could he even handle it? Lyra took a step back, her eyes flashing with caution. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They'll find you if you keep looking." Ryan's breath caught in his chest. "Who will find me? Who are you running from?" Lyra hesitated, glancing around nervously, her hands trembling slightly. "I can't tell you yet, but you're not safe. None of us are." The urgency in her voice was enough to send a chill down Ryan's spine. He had never seen her like this, vulnerable, unguarded. Whatever she was hiding, it was much bigger than either of them. "I don't care what it is," Ryan said, his voice steady now. "I want to help. I need to know the truth." Lyra's eyes widened, and for a moment, it seemed like she was going to turn and walk away again, like she had before. But then, as if making a decision, she reached up slowly and lifted the edge of her mask. Ryan held his breath. Every instinct told him to look away, to give her space. But something about this moment felt different. There was no turning back now. As the mask came off, Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. What he saw shook him to his core. Beneath the mask, Lyra's face was not human. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal glow, and her eyes, those eyes, were no longer the glowing, intense orbs he had seen before. They were dark, deeper than the night sky, and seemed to pull him in, showing him things he wasn't sure he was ready to understand. Her features were sharp, alien in a way that he couldn't explain, yet they were also oddly beautiful. She wasn't like any creature he had ever seen, and yet as her gaze met his, he felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if he had known her all his life. I'm not from here," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not human, and I never meant for you to get caught up in this. But now you're part of it. whether you like it or not. Ryan stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what he was seeing. This wasn't just some girl with a mask. This was something entirely different, something from a world beyond his understanding. But why? Why Earth? Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to tell him something she had been holding back for too long. "I'm here because I have to be," she said, her voice filled with a sadness that Ryan could feel deep in his bones. "I'm the last of my kind. My people. They were destroyed in a war. I was sent to Earth to protect it from the same fate." Ryan's mind spun. She was an alien, sent to protect Earth. It didn't make sense. From what? Who would want to destroy Earth? Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, as if fighting to keep herself together. "The Galactic Empire. They've been looking for me, and they'll stop at nothing to get me." Ryan didn't know what to say. Everything he thought he knew about the world, about reality, was shifting beneath him. Aliens, a galactic empire, a war that had wiped out Lyra's people. It was all too much to process. But one thing was clear. This was bigger than anything he could have imagined. "You can't tell anyone," Lyra said urgently, as she quickly replaced her mask, hiding her face once more. "They'll come after you too. You don't understand what you're getting into." Ryan stood there, stunned, trying to take it all in. He had just seen the truth. Lyra was not just a mysterious woman with a mask. She was a warrior, a survivor, and now she was asking for his help. And for some reason, he knew that his life would never be the same again. Danger strikes. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Lyra and the things she had told him. The truth she had revealed felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him, and every corner he turned, he half expected something, to appear and remind him of the dangers she had warned about. Lyra had disappeared again after their brief conversation. She had told him to stay away, that she was a threat to his safety, and that his involvement could only lead to trouble. But Ryan wasn't the type to back down, especially when the stakes were this high. He didn't understand all the details, but one thing was certain. Lyra needed his help. And even though the whole situation seemed impossible, he couldn't turn his back on her. So, for the next few days, he watched the news, kept his phone close, and tried to gather information. Yet, despite all his efforts, nothing unusual seemed to happen. The city went about its business, life continuing as usual. That is, until the morning everything changed. Ryan was walking down the street, headed to the cafe where he usually stopped to think, when he noticed something strange. The air felt colder than usual, and there was an unnatural stillness in the atmosphere. The people around him moved as if in a daze, their faces blank, unaware of the sudden tension in the air. He felt it too, a sense that something terrible was about to happen. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "Ryan." The text read, "They're here. Get out now." It was from Lyra. His heart slammed in his chest. They're here. The Galactic Empire. The very ones Lyra had warned him about. Before he could even think, Ryan spun around, his eyes scanning the street. He didn't know where to go or who he was looking for, but instinct told him to move, to run. And then he saw them. Across the street, at the edge of the plaza, stood a group of figures dressed in dark uniforms. They were tall, almost unnaturally so, and their movements were eerily synchronized. Their faces were hidden behind metallic helmets that reflected the city's lights, making them seem even more like machines than men. Ryan's stomach dropped. They were here. The Galactic Empire had arrived. Without thinking, he turned and ran in the opposite direction, heart racing. He needed to find Lyra. Now, he darted through alleyways, trying to lose himself in the maze of the city, but it was no use. He could hear the sounds of boots hitting the pavement behind him. The Empire soldiers were closing in. Panic gripped his chest as he turned a corner and almost collided with someone. He froze. Lyra. She was standing there, masked and calm, as though she had expected him. But the look in her eyes was different now. It wasn't just the quiet fear he had seen before. This was determination, a cold, unshakable resolve. She didn't look at all like the girl who had tried to keep him safe. This was the warrior, the last survivor of her kind. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice low, urgent. "They found us, and now they'll stop at nothing to destroy you." Ryan barely had time to process her words before a loud crackling noise filled the air. A high-pitched hum, the unmistakable sound of a weapon charging up. Without warning, a beam of bright blue energy shot past them, narrowly missing Ryan's shoulder and slamming into the wall beside him. The street erupted into chaos. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The soldiers were right behind them. Lyra acted fast. "Move," she shouted, grabbing Ryan's wrist and pulling him into a nearby doorway. They scrambled into a narrow passageway, dodging more beams that shot through the air. Ryan could feel the heat of them, even though they missed him by inches. "This way," Lyra said, pulling him toward a small maintenance door at the back of a building. She slammed it open with ease, the sounds of blaster fire echoing behind them. "We need to get underground." Ryan was stunned. He had never imagined anything like this. Real danger. He had only read about it in stories. But this was different. This was real. And it was happening to him. As they raced through the maze of underground tunnels, Ryan could hear the distant sounds of their pursuers. The soldiers weren't far behind. "How many of them are there?" Ryan gasped, his legs burning from running. "Too many," Lyra replied tersely. "And they're all highly trained. I'll need time to get us to safety." Ryan nodded, but his mind was racing. What had he gotten himself into? One moment, he had been sitting in his apartment. The next, he was running for his life, chased by the most dangerous people he could imagine. He barely knew what the Galactic Empire was, but he could tell it was bad. Really bad. Lyra led him down a narrow corridor and into a dimly lit room. There were old electrical panels and abandoned equipment scattered around, but it didn't look like anyone had been here for years. She locked the door behind them and pressed her back to it, her face set in grim determination. "We have a few minutes," she said, her voice calm but with a tinge of fear in it. "I'm going to need you to trust me, Ryan. They're not just looking for me. They're looking for anyone who can help me." "Help you with what?" Ryan asked, his mind still reeling. "They're after the key to the last weapon my people created," she said. "A weapon that could destroy the Empire. And if they find it, if they get their hands on it, Earth will be the next target. The end of your world." Ryan was speechless. The gravity of what she was saying hit him all at once, like a punch to the gut. He hadn't signed up for any of this. He had simply wanted to understand the mystery of the girl with the mask. Now he was standing in a hidden room, running from an alien empire, knowing that the fate of his world hung in the balance. "What can I do?" Ryan asked, his voice steady, despite the chaos swirling in his mind. Lyra's eyes met his, a flash of something. Hope, perhaps, flickering in them for just a moment. "You've already done it," she said quietly. "By choosing to stay, you've already chosen your side." The key to salvation. The underground room where Ryan and Lyra hid was cold, its walls damp with years of neglect. The faint hum of the city above them felt distant, as if they had crossed over into another world entirely. Ryan leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath, but his mind was a storm of questions. Lyra paced the small room, her mask now off, revealing the full extent of her alien features, shimmering skin, sharp cheekbones, and those intense, otherworldly eyes. She had once been a mystery, but now, in this moment, Ryan was starting to realize just how deep the mystery ran. Lyra stopped pacing and turned to him, her expression resolute. "They won't stop. Not until they have it. And once they get it, Earth won't stand a chance." Ryan's mind was racing. What's it? What are they after? She hesitated, as though weighing whether or not to tell him more. The strain of the chase and the ever-present danger were taking their toll, but her voice remained steady. My people created a weapon, a device capable of disabling the Galactic Empire's entire fleet. It's the last hope of my species. It's the key to survival for the few of us who remain. Ryan's stomach churned at the thought of a weapon of mass destruction. But then the reality hit. Lyra wasn't just any alien. She was the last of her kind, sent to protect Earth from the very same empire that had destroyed her people. She had risked everything to bring the weapon to Earth, and now it was in danger of falling into the wrong hands. So, the weapon is here, on Earth, Ryan said slowly, trying to piece everything together. And they're hunting it down. Lyra nodded, her face tight with anxiety. Yes, the weapon is hidden, but they have methods of tracking it. They know it's here, and if they find it, she stopped, shaking her head, as if the thought alone was too terrible to finish. Ryan felt a knot form in his stomach. His life had been turned upside down in the span of a few days, and now he was involved in a war between alien species, one that could determine the fate of the entire planet. And where is it? Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Where's the weapon? Lyra's gaze hardened. I don't know, but I have a lead. A place where it might be hidden. But it's not just a location. It's a sequence, a code that will unlock the weapon's full potential. And that's where you come in, Ryan. He blinked in surprise. Me? How am I supposed to help? You've already helped more than you know. Lyra said, her voice low and intense. You've seen the symbol, haven't you? The one on the napkin. The one I left for you. It's not just a random marking. It's a part of the code. A key. The rest of it is scattered in pieces around Earth. And it's up to us to find them before the Empire does. Ryan felt his heart race. It was starting to make sense, at least a little. The symbol he had found on that napkin wasn't just a clue. It was the start of something much bigger, a series of puzzles that led to the weapon. But how was he supposed to find the other pieces of the code? How do we find the rest? Ryan asked, his mind spinning with the enormity of the task. Lyra walked over to a dusty table in the corner, where she had spread out a map of the world, along with several old documents and photographs. The symbols on the documents matched the one Ryan had seen before, and his mind snapped into focus. This is where you come in, Lyra repeated, tapping the map with a finger. You're from here. You know this place better than anyone. The other pieces of the code are hidden in plain sight, in places that only someone with knowledge of Earth's history can find. You'll need to use your resources, your knowledge, to find them. Ryan glanced at the map, and his brain began working furiously. This wasn't just about running and hiding anymore. It was about unlocking the key to Earth's survival. He had never asked for this, never imagined he'd be the one to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But now, there was no turning back. All right, Ryan said, his voice more determined than he had ever felt. Let's find this code. Let's stop the Empire. Lyra smiled, a faint but genuine smile. It was the first time she had smiled since he'd met her, and Ryan could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could do this. But just as quickly as the moment of calm arrived, it was shattered. The door to the room suddenly rattled, and Ryan's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward it just as a sharp voice called out from the other side. I know you're in there. We can hear you. Ryan's blood ran cold. The Empire had found them. Lyra's expression hardened. We don't have much time. We need to move. She grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward a small hatch in the floor that Ryan hadn't noticed before. It led to another series of tunnels beneath the building, dark and winding. She pushed him forward. Go, Lyra ordered, her eyes scanning the room for any way out. The door shuddered again, louder this time. The Empire was closing in. Ryan didn't hesitate. He jumped into the dark tunnel, heart racing, mind working on overdrive. There was no time to lose. Lyra had already risked everything to bring him into this mission, and now it was up to him to help her unlock the secrets of Earth's future. The sound of footsteps grew louder. It was only a matter of seconds before the door would break open, and the soldiers would flood in. Ryan's mind was clear now. He was no longer just a guy caught up in something he didn't understand. He was a part of this fight. He was the key. The tunnel was narrow and dark, the walls slick with moisture. But Lyra kept her pace steady, pulling him forward, urging him to move faster. "This way," she said urgently. "We have to get to the first location before they catch up. We don't have much time." Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. Every step felt like a countdown. He didn't know what they would find at the end of this journey, or if they would even make it out alive. But there was one thing he knew for sure now. He wasn't just fighting for Lyra anymore. He was fighting for Earth. The chase beneath the Earth. The tunnels were a labyrinth. Cold, dark, and damp. The narrow passages twisted and turned in every direction, each step taking Ryan and Lyra deeper into the forgotten depths of Earth. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, reminding them both that they were running out of time. Ryan could feel the weight of the danger pressing down on them. The Empire was relentless, and now they were not only after Lyra, but after the key to the weapon that could destroy them. The urgency was suffocating, but Lyra seemed strangely calm. She moved with purpose, her steps sure, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. But Ryan knew better. No one could be prepared for this. They came to a junction in the tunnel, and Lyra stopped abruptly. Ryan's breath came in short, frantic bursts as he looked at her, waiting for her next move. "This is it," Lyra said softly. "The first piece of the code is hidden here." Ryan blinked. "In these tunnels?" Lyra nodded. "My people built a network of safe houses, places where we could hide the pieces of the code in case something went wrong. The first location is just ahead. But be careful. The Empire has ways of tracking us, and they know we're underground." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "So they can find us down here." Lyra's expression grew more serious. "They've already found the access points to these tunnels. They can use a device to track energy signatures. And we've been running for too long. They're closing in." Ryan felt a chill crawl up his spine. He looked around, the darkness seeming to press in on him from all sides. The tunnels felt like a trap now, not a safe haven. But there was no turning back. They had to find the code. "Let's keep moving," Ryan said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "We need to get that piece before they catch up." Lyra gave him a quick, almost approving glance and turned to continue down the narrow corridor. The walls seemed to close in tighter the further they went, the air growing thicker with each step. The tunnel was getting steeper, and Ryan could hear water trickling somewhere in the distance, the sound growing louder the deeper they ventured. They reached a small chamber, its floor covered in debris and old crates. The air here felt stagnant, almost suffocating. Lyra knelt down beside an old stone pedestal, dust and cobwebs clinging to its surface. She wiped the grime away, revealing a series of ancient symbols carved into the stone. "This is it," she whispered. "The first part of the code." Ryan stepped closer, squinting at the symbols. They were foreign, intricate, and beautiful in their alien design. Some of them seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, like they were pulsing with life, while others were barely visible at all. Lyra ran her fingers over the symbols. "I need to unlock it," she said, her voice soft but filled with intensity. "There's a mechanism hidden inside, but it requires a specific touch, a certain sequence. Only someone from my world can activate it." Ryan watched in silence as she worked. Her movements were precise, calculated, her focus unshakable. As she pressed her fingers into the symbols, they shifted, and with a soft click, the pedestal began to open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small metal cylinder, smooth and sleek, with a faint blue glow emanating from it. It was no bigger than a pen, but Ryan could tell it held something powerful, something dangerous. "This is the first piece of the code," Lyra said, holding the cylinder carefully in her hands. This will guide us to the next location. Ryan reached out to take it, but before he could touch it, a loud crash echoed from the tunnel behind them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Ryan felt his pulse spike. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice flat. "We have to go now." She shoved the cylinder into a hidden pouch beneath her jacket and sprinted toward the far end of the chamber. Ryan hesitated, looking over his shoulder at the dark tunnel they had just come through. He could hear the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate, approaching fast. "Come on, Ryan," Lyra shouted, already halfway to the tunnel's exit. Ryan shook himself from his paralysis and followed her, his legs pumping harder, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He was used to running from danger, but this was different. The Empire was no mere threat. They were a force of nature, like a storm that wouldn't stop until everything in its path was gone. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a steep incline, leading up to an old, rusted ladder. "We'll climb out here," Lyra said, already pulling herself up. "We need to get back to the surface." Ryan followed, his hands slipping on the cold metal rungs as he scrambled up after her. The sound of the Empire soldiers grew louder, and Ryan's breath caught in his chest as he heard the unmistakable hum of energy weapons charging. The moment they reached the top, Lyra kicked open a metal hatch, and they emerged into a narrow alley. The city's noise greeted them, a cacophony of distant car engines and the buzz of neon signs above. It was almost like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't shifted beneath their feet just moments before. But Ryan knew better. The Empire was still hunting them. And now they had the first piece of the code. Lyra didn't waste a second. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the shadows, her eyes scanning the alley for any sign of danger. They needed to disappear, fast. "We have to move, Ryan," she said, her voice tense. "They'll be looking for us up top. We need to get off the streets." Ryan's mind raced. They had the first piece, but what did it mean? How could they decipher it before the Empire found them? He looked over at Lyra. She was scanning the horizon, her alien features tense, alert. She had carried them this far, but Ryan realized, with a sickening jolt, that they were running out of time. The Empire was closing in, and the future of Earth, and the weapon that could save them, was still a mystery. "We'll figure it out," Ryan said, even as doubt gnawed at his insides. "We have to." Lyra nodded, pulling him further into the shadows. The chase wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The final stand. Ryan felt the weight of the city pressing in on him. The air was thick with the hum of activity, but it felt wrong. Underneath the hustle and bustle of everyday life, an unseen danger loomed, waiting. The Empire was closing in. They knew they were after the code. But Ryan also knew one thing: they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. Lyra had come too far. The streets, once familiar, now felt like a maze. Every corner was a potential trap, every shadow a hiding spot for the soldiers hunting them. But Ryan didn't care about the city anymore. He cared about Lyra. And more than that, he cared about Earth. The weight of the choice was more than he'd ever expected, but it was undeniable. "We're almost there," Lyra whispered, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around them. Her face was set in stone, her determination unwavering. "The last location is just ahead. This is where it all ends." Ryan glanced at her, the fire in her eyes both comforting and terrifying. She had come to Earth to protect it. She had risked everything to stop the Empire, to finish what her people had started. And now, in this very moment, the fate of humanity lay in their hands. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Let's do this." They turned down a narrow alley, and Ryan's heart raced. His instincts screamed at him, but his feet carried him forward. The final piece of the code was close now, and so were their enemies. But this time, there was no more running. There was nowhere to hide. As they reached the end of the alley, they saw it, a small, unassuming building tucked between two larger structures. The kind of place that might blend into the background, unnoticed by most passersby. But to Ryan and Lyra, it was everything. The last piece of the puzzle lay within. Lyra pressed a hand against the door. This is it. Ryan took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't even someone who had ever imagined being in the middle of a galactic war. But today, he had become part of something bigger than himself. And it felt right. Lyra stepped inside, her movements quick and decisive. The door opened into a dimly lit room, lined with old machines and technology that looked far older than anything Ryan had ever seen. The room smelled of dust and metal, but there was a strange energy pulsing in the air, an undercurrent of power that made Ryan's skin prickle. Lyra moved quickly to the center of the room, where a pedestal sat, covered in a thin layer of dust. Ryan followed her, his mind racing. Everything had led to this moment, the final part of the code. But as Lyra reached for the pedestal, something changed. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the doorway. Too late, a voice growled. Ryan's blood ran cold. He turned to see the soldiers, 4 of them, enter the room. Tall, imposing, their armored suits gleamed under the dim lights. But the one in the front was different. His helmet was sleek, almost elegant, and his presence seemed to command the room. The leader. Ryan took a step back, but Lyra didn't flinch. She was already in position, her eyes locked on the pedestal. "You won't stop this," she said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. "This weapon will destroy your empire. It will end everything you've done." The leader didn't move. He simply observed her, his posture cold and calculating. "You think this device is the end of us? We have destroyed entire civilizations, girl. What makes you think we fear a weapon? We've already won." Ryan could feel the tension thickening. The Empire had underestimated Earth. They thought they could crush it, obliterate it like all the other worlds they'd conquered. But they didn't understand what humanity was, what it meant to fight for something that mattered. And Ryan, he felt it now, deep in his bones. The fire that made him human. The stubborn refusal to give up, no matter the odds. "We're not like the other civilizations," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "And we're not going down without a fight." Lyra smiled grimly. "We've already won," she said. "The code is complete." Before the leader could react, Lyra slammed her palm down on the pedestal. The room hummed with energy, a bright light bursting from the machine as the symbols on the walls began to shift. The final part of the code had been unlocked. And for the first time, Ryan understood what that meant. The room began to vibrate, the walls shaking as if something massive was waking from a long slumber. The Empire soldiers stiffened, their expressions masked behind their helmets. They hadn't seen what was coming. But Ryan had. A loud crack echoed through the room as the ceiling opened, revealing a massive device hidden beneath the building, ancient and powerful, its structure humbling. The weapon had activated, the last hope of Lyra's people, and Earth's only chance to survive. Ryan watched in awe as the weapon powered up. It wasn't a simple destructive force, it was a beacon, a signal, a call to arms. Lyra turned to him, her face glowing with triumph. "It's done. The weapon is ready." But just as relief began to settle in, the leader of the Empire raised his weapon, aiming it at them both. "No," he said coldly. "It's over." In an instant, the world around them exploded into chaos. The air filled with the sharp crack of blaster fire, but Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her down as the room erupted in flames. The pedestal exploded, sending debris flying. But as the dust settled, the Empire soldiers were still standing. But their movements were sluggish, their suits malfunctioning. The weapon wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a disruptor, a force that jammed the Empire's technology, rendering them powerless. Lyra and Ryan stood together, their hands gripped tightly, eyes locked. They had made it. Against all odds, they had found the key, unlocked the weapon. and turned the tide. The leader's helmeted face was a mask of fury, but he didn't move to strike again. He knew it was over. "We've won," Lyra said, her voice low, but there was a flicker of something softer in her eyes now. She wasn't just talking about the battle. She was talking about something deeper. Ryan nodded, his chest still heaving with the rush of adrenaline. "We've won." And for the first time, he realized what it meant to fight for Earth, to protect it. The war was over, but the fight had just begun. The weapon, powered by Lyra's people and their final gift, pulsed in the background, ready to protect Earth from the Empire for as long as it was needed. Ryan turned to Lyra one last time. "What happens now?" Lyra smiled, her eyes softening. "Now, we rebuild. Together."